Good afternoon and welcome to Grief 101, Part 3. I was asked by several people after I did Part 1 and Part 2 of Grief 101 if I would go back and actually talk about anger and depression and people that seem to get stuck in that phase of the grief process. And not only what that looked like, but also what you could do to help people to get out of it and also help yourself. And it appears that there are some people that can work through grief relatively quickly, and there are other people that take a little bit longer to work through grief. And there are those who truly need some professional help to work through that grief and what all that looks like and how it might be entailed in the workings of grief and how it might even work in your life. So today I'm going to attempt to address just the anger and depression stages of grief. We didn't spend a lot of time on them before because we didn't have enough time to spend on just a couple stages of grief. And so I've been asked by some friends to go back. I feel like those are probably the two stages that people get stuck in the most. And I would concur. Denial is people stay in it a while, but sooner or later, you just absolutely just can't deny the fact that you have grief in your life, that you've lost something or someone, and that thing or that person is gone from your life. And you can't deny that. So denial is sooner or later will go away, and typically sooner than later. The bargaining seems to go away fairly quickly also, as it is a reality that comes to grips with everybody that there's no amount of bargaining you can do that will bring that person back or that whatever it is that you've lost. So here we are in anger and depression and what that looks like before acceptance and then finding meaning. Now, I did call a couple of my friends who are therapists and ask them to give me some insight because I trust them. I believe that they don't necessarily have the same worldviews as I do, but they're very excellent therapists and they have people's best interests at heart, and they are very good at what they do, and I trust their opinion and would trust their opinion to send anybody to them to discuss any issues that they might have, including the grief that might be stuck in the anger and depression stage. So my opinion and what I felt like that's happened in my life and the people around me and what I've seen in grief is that there are some reasons that people get stuck in this anger stage and then stuck in the depression stage. Meredith Meyer and Hemfeld write a really good book called Love's a Choice. And in that book, they say that they feel like depression is just anger turned inward. It's just anger that's depressed, that's repressed and pushed down. And sooner or later that turns into depression because there's nothing to do with it. It just continues to manifest itself inside of us until we don't know what to do with our lives, and we just are hopeless and helpless and don't know what to do. So I'm going to talk about first what I believe constitutes people getting stuck in that anger stage. The first one of those things that really causes people to get stuck in the anger stage when somebody dies close to them or they lose a job or they lose something in their life, whether that's an event or whether that's a person. It really doesn't seem to make much difference. Even a pet, if somebody has a pet die, then the grief is much the same. But one of those things that keeps them from moving forward and moving on with their life, not moving on, but moving forward, is not knowing the whole story. Our minds need to know everything that happened. And if for some reason we're putting this puzzle together and it has 12 pieces and we only find 7, 8, 9, or maybe even 9.5 of those pieces, we still lack a little piece of that, which inadvertently makes us angry. We know that there's a piece missing and we just can't put it together. And the unfortunate part about that is sometimes that those pieces will never be put together. I know some families would have loved ones disappear for whatever reason, and they never found them, and they never were able to track them down, and there was never the ability to put the entire puzzle together, and it would make them angry. Another one of those is that the loss is not fair. Doesn't fit into a common rule or common attitude in our world, that somebody being killed in a car accident by a drunk driver is not fair. Somebody taking their own life is not fair. Somebody that is killed by a drive-by shooting and they weren't the person that the person was shooting at is not fair. It caused people to be very angry. There's another part of that is that maybe we're angry because this grief triggered an older grief that was unresolved. We have this happen a lot in a hospice. We watch families come in and a person who is dying of dementia or Alzheimer's or a stroke where they are not hungry, they don't want to eat or drink. But this person that's related to them has been through a trauma earlier in their life where they couldn't feed somebody, they couldn't get them enough food, or maybe they themselves went hungry. Then that trauma is pushed off onto this piece of grief, and it makes them very angry. And it doesn't have anything to do with today. It has everything to do with many years ago, maybe a year ago, maybe 2, maybe 10, maybe 25. There are some ways that people repress this anger. Sometimes it's just people's personality. I have the personality of somebody I'm pretty open about talking about everything I want to. It's not much about me that I wouldn't share openly and honestly. And when excuse the French, when I'm pissed off, you'll probably know about it because I'll probably tell you, unless it's in a situation where it might hurt somebody else, and then I'll be much more cautious about how that's portrayed. But I typically do not repress anger. I will tell you that I have in my life and repressed it a lot when I was a very young child and even through my teens and early 20s. And I repressed a lot of anger. And then not only did I repress it, but I tried to cover it up with alcohol and drugs, and use them as an anesthetic, thinking that would help. When lots of people don't know this, but alcohol is a natural depressant. So you're depressed, you have anger, you're pushing the anger down, and then you drink alcohol, which is a natural depressant. I mean, who wouldn't be depressed? It's a Molotov cocktail waiting for a place to go off. It's a grenade without the pin in it, waiting for somebody to let go. And for many years, that's the way that played out for me. And I'm going to talk about that just a little bit later. We sometimes get stuck in this anger stage and this depression stage because we don't feel like it's okay to be angry at the person that we're angry at. Someone close to you takes their own life. You love them beyond a shadow of a doubt. There is absolutely no love that is greater for them than the love you have for them. How in the world could you possibly rationalize being angry at them? People feel many people who are deep in their Christian faith feel like they can't be angry at God. People who love themselves and are told that they were a child of God, and how are they angry at themselves? And so many times we get stuck in this anger because we don't know, or we don't want to be angry at the person we're really angry at. And then on some occasions, we're angry at somebody in real time because of something that happened to us 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. And we don't remember that or thought we had dealt with it. And quite frankly, that's what most of my studies are on, is unresolved grief and how that affects us in today's world, especially in addiction relapse, how unresolved grief affects relapse in alcoholics and addicts. And I believe that's a real thing. So then the depression, we get stuck in the depression because we're angry and we're not sharing that anger. We're not showing that anger. We're not allowing that anger to get out. So we are depressed. And what lots of people see in people who have anxiety or full-blown depression is bouts of anger. And I liken that to a pressure cooker. When you put a pressure cooker on the stove, and I remember many years ago, and some of you who are younger may not even know this, but many people canned food in glass ball jars with a lid on top, and they would put them in this aluminum pot. It's called a pressure cooker, and put a real heavy lid on it and fasten it down, and you would put it in the stove and heat that up and let that cook, get that hot, and build up pressure inside there, and it would seal those lids on those cans so that the freshness would stay in those cans, and they would last all winter. And at any time in the winter, you could go get a can of green beans or lima beans or anything else that had been canned, and you could bring it out and serve it almost as fresh. Those pressure cookers, though, if you put this pot on the stove with water in it and all these cans of vegetables in it, and you turn the burner on underneath it, and you just let it go, sooner or later that aluminum pot is going to blow up. So what they do is they put a little pressure relief valve on the top of it, and as that builds up steam and builds up pressure inside of it, the little valve goes psst, 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 and lets off that pressure. And that's what happens lots of times when people are having repressed anger and depression, and that you see that little bits of anger come out. They're usually aimed at somebody close to them, because unconsciously what we do is we address anger towards people that are close to us, because unconsciously we know those people won't walk away from us. We can treat them like they're dog poo on our shoe, and then 5 minutes later we can apologize and they'll usually let it go. And where strangers, when you get mad at them like that, they'll walk away and not have anything to do with you anymore. And so typically you see that anger spew out on people closest to them. And typically they'll get hurt. Those people that have that repressed anger and that depression bottled up inside them, they release it and hurt people. Many times in many ways, I've talked about this over the many years now that I've been doing this, and I don't remember where I heard it the first time. I wish I could remember, because I would quote that person as saying it, so I wouldn't be stepping on anybody's toes. I didn't make this up, but hurting people hurt people. When that's just the truth. When somebody lashes out at me because they're angry at something, most of the time I just look at them and stand there and go, what has happened to you that was so bad that you have to be angry at me? because 9 times out of 10, it's not about me. It's about something else entirely. So we have to figure out how we're going to do that. How we're going to, do we have that unresolved grief buried? Do we have that repressed grief buried? Are we shooting out anger to other people for no apparent reason, when we don't even know why we're doing it? And if you're doing that, the odds are in my favor that you have some anger that you haven't dealt with. You have some unresolved grief that you haven't dealt with. And I did. I had some unresolved grief from very, very long ago that I had not dealt with for 30 years that I had to eventually take care of. So one of my therapist friends said this, and it's a very good analogy, I think. Anger is like the vehicle. It's the car that you're driving in. Anger is healthy, and driving the car down the road is as long as you're staying between the lines, you're driving the speed limit, you're stopping and not hitting the person in front of you, you're fine. But if in fact you're driving too fast, or if you're not keeping in the lines, or if you're not doing the things that you need to do, if you're not being angry in a healthy way, you will get hurt. You will wreck that vehicle. And not only you will get hurt, but somebody else probably will too. We know that this part of this, and if you're watching this and you want some help working through this, or you want some help helping somebody else work through this, the number one thing to do here is just like the 12-step process. We have to admit we have a problem. And so the first step is saying, yeah, I have some anger issues. And now I need to figure out how to work on those, where they come from. I'll give you just a example of how this works. About 15 years ago, I had a mid 50-year-old woman show up in my office. She'd made an appointment. She said she needed to work on certain things. And as we met the first time, she told me that she was an alcoholic. And she really wanted to quit, but she was having a hard time quitting. She'd seen lots and lots of therapists. She'd tried to use other things to stop alcohol, but they'd all been unsuccessful. And now she really wanted to stop, and she just needed an avenue, to start. Just needed a way to start that. And so I asked her if I could ask some very personal questions. And for that first meeting, I asked some personal questions and didn't really get a lot of really deep answers. It was kind of the feeling stage of that. And then the second meeting when we met, we were in about a half an hour in, and I said, and she'd give me some clues along the way, and I felt like I really had some insight from some things that she'd said to me, and I said, I'm going to ask you something very, very personal, and you don't have to answer it if you don't want to, but I really think that will help us to get where we need to go. She said, okay, I need to be sober. You need to ask whatever you want. I said, did you ever have an abortion in your life? Well, she didn't have to answer the question. I could tell by the look on her face that I was right. Well, I found out that she'd had the abortion when she was 14. So I said, so at 14 years old, you have an abortion. You're in your mid-50s now. You're still drinking. What age did you start drinking? She said 15. So she'd been drinking 40 years. And I said, so you're drinking to cover up that hurt? She began to cry. I said, so are you angry at the father? She said, no. He didn't even know. We dated for just a couple times. He didn't know. Angry at yourself? No, she could say, quite frankly, at 14, I couldn't make that decision. So who took you? She said, my mom took me. My mom made me go. She said, is your mom still alive? No. She died several years ago. She said, are you angry at your mom? She didn't have to answer that question either. We spent the next 2 or 3 weeks working on the anger that she had repressed at her mom. And she felt like who had killed her child. She had held in for 40 years. It's a lot of anger, a lot of repression, a lot of depression, a lot of alcohol. I can tell you that she was able to stop drinking. She was able to get to a place where she needed to be. She was able to work the 12-step process. And what I want to tell you is I tell everybody else that when we're working with people that are stuck in this stage is a lot like working with addicts and alcoholics. We don't get to the root. We don't dig the root out. We don't go back to the point where it all started many times. That's why people say, well, I needed to go see a psychologist or psychiatrist today. I need to get some medication. So, well, I'm not against medication. And quite frankly, there are lots of people I know that could not survive without medication. But I think way too many times in the United States, and maybe even around the world, we mask that anger and that depression with medication, and we don't go back and dig out what's causing it to begin with. So anyway, that gives you an idea of what I'm talking about, those past hurts. And if you're watching this now, you really want to work on yourself, then I'm positive that every one of us has a past hurt. Whether we've dealt with it or whether we're not is really not much of concern today, but you have them nonetheless. So that segues us to what do we do with all these things? Because there's people out there that have lost children to drunk drivers, because they've lost children and parents to alcohol and drugs. Kids have watched their parents kill themselves right in front of them by smoking, by drinking, by somebody saying you got to quit drinking, you're going to die, and they keep drinking anyway. What I do typically in this particular area is once we start working on this, and that's why I'm going to help you do this on your own. And what I'm going to tell you is if you don't feel like you can do it on your own, then you can reach out. You can reach out to me, or you can reach out to a therapist somewhere or a pastor or somebody close to you. Maybe get somebody to help you work through it. But I like to start out with figuring out who you're angry at. Are you angry at that daughter that overdosed, even though she's the love of your life? Are you angry at that granddaughter or grandson that took their life, even though you love them to death? Are you angry at that parent that you watched kill themselves right in front of you by drinking too much or taking drugs or driving drunk or who knows what, smoking cigarette after cigarette, being overweight? Are you angry at them for them killing themselves at an early age over time? Are you angry at the people who treated you badly when you were young? So we need to find out who you're angry at. Now, I usually ask people to make a list of all the people you're angry at. And this is a little bit miscombobulated, I know, but bear with me. Many times I've sat in my office and where there was a male or a female, either one, who started to make a list, and it was a certain group of people. And they said to me, I don't know how I could tell you all those people. Give you a short example. A young lady who had been using for a long period of time. And for many years while she was using, she had to sell herself to be able to buy the drugs she needed. And she couldn't remember all those men who had taken advantage of her. And I said, well, let's do this. Rather than worrying about all of that, let's just say men. And so we listed them like that. for the man who had seemingly been chastised and bullied and hurt by kids in his school or kids in college or people in his workplace, then we just simply said workplace or school or something like that. Now, when you're making this list, there's always two people that everybody forgets. Promise you, if I don't tell you, you'll forget. One of those is yourself. I mean, how in the world could you be mad at yourself? You know, that just doesn't seem practical. When I can tell you that lots of people that I know are angry at themselves, especially people who put themselves in a situation where they might have been hurt by somebody else, but it was their fault they were there. Then there's God. And for Christians, especially, for people who have a deep belief in God, it's hard for them to understand how they could be angry at him. And this is what I'm going to tell you. It's possible to be angry at God, and it's okay to be angry at God. He's got broad shoulders. I was upset at him just last week. I mean, I was angry at him for something that happened, not in my life, but in somebody else's. That didn't last very long. And because I'm doing this, I can tell you that I know how to take care of that. So I haven't repressed it. I shared it with somebody. And then make those lists. And then after you get through the list, then I just sit down and write a mean, nasty letter to all those people. Never to be sent. Letter doesn't have anything to do with anybody else. The letter has everything to do with you. Everything to do with you. Because many times when you're angry at somebody and you're full of depression and you're stuck in this rut, a lot of it has to do with the fact is there's some unforgiveness going on there. It's hard to forgive somebody for leaving you. You know, I've had family members come to me and say, well, I'm really angry at my husband for dying, even though it was cancer that he had. Okay. They said, well, that's not rational. It wasn't him that caused the cancer. Nobody said it was. But if you're angry at him for leaving you, then you need to share that, because repressing that is just going to put you in the depression stage. And it's just going to come back and bite you later on, even if it's 5 years or 10 years or 20 years later. Maybe you get remarried and you're married to a new guy, and for whatever reason, he's sick. And all that stuff is going to come back up again. And you're going to grieve it just like you did before, or even worse. And the people around you are going to get hurt because of it, including you. Excuse me. So then we come to that forgiveness part. Now, forgiveness doesn't mean you have to forget. I'm not asking anybody to forget the atrocities that happen against them. But forgiveness, there's lots of reasons I believe that we need to forgive those people and God and ourselves, is because I believe forgiveness is the act of setting a prisoner free and realizing the prisoner was you. Unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And many times when you've been hurt by somebody, the other person doesn't even know it. Or maybe they don't even care. Forgiveness and working through all of this anger is all about you. It has everything to do with you and really nothing to do with them. Sorry, I had a little tickle I had to get rid of. So then if you're helping someone else, maybe it's not you. But what I find is many times when we're trying to help somebody else that's close to us, sometimes we're not very careful at identifying with them because of something that we're feeling. So you need to first ask yourself, why do I really want to help this person? Is it because I still have some unresolved grief for that, whatever that I feel like they do? Or is it because I really want to help this person and I'm okay? First question you need to ask. The second question you need to ask is if this person is in a place where they're anesthetizing themselves through either alcohol or drugs, and you feel like you got to take care of them, that you got to protect them, that you got to go with them to make sure that they're okay, then I'm going to tell you that you're flat out wrong. Because going with them and making sure they're okay while they're still involved in the act of using an anesthetic of some kind is enabling. And that'll only perpetrate that anger and that depression. It'll only allow it to continue. The only way you can really take care of that is that you can talk to them and tell them how you feel. Be honest with them. And this is where I believe the rubber meets the road. Rubber meets the road. People talk to me all the time and say, well, I don't feel like I can talk to them because I don't feel like they'll really take that and not get mad at me. I said, well, okay, this is the next question I asked. So are you guys good friends? Well, yeah, we've been good friends for many years. Okay, so this is what I want to tell you my definition of good friend is. A good friend is somebody that will tell them some things that they don't like, even if it might jeopardize your friendship. Yeah. You need to tell them they need to get some help. You need to tell them that they can work through this. You need to tell them at the minimum they need to watch these 3 videos. You know, anesthetizing, drinking alcohol, taking drugs, taking pills, doing whatever to get through grief will not get you through grief. It'll only postpone what is inevitable. Because when you look at the 6 stages of grief, you will have to go through them all. One way or the other, you will go through them. Your mind and your body will make you go through them, whether you like it or not. I don't know that I've really helped a lot today. I hope I have. I'd say that if you're really, really, really stuck in this place called grief, that's really in the stages of anger and depression, that you probably really ought to look at calling somebody professional, or at the minimum a pastor or a really good friend that knows a little bit about grief and the process, and talk to them. Because what happens many times is once you get stuck in all of this, the mind builds what they call a trauma membrane around this trauma, this grief. And if it isn't taken care of over time and another grief is piled on it, another grief is piled on it, that trauma membrane becomes thicker and harder, and it's almost impossible to get through without professional help. Only other thing I would say to all of you who are watching, that if you're in this situation, that if you know somebody that's in this situation, I would say if you don't do it for yourself, do it for the people around you. You know, because unresolved grief not only continues with you, well, you will pass it on if you're not careful. You will pass that unresolved grief on as a generational curse. And I say, as my good friend Charmin Gabbard always says, it ran in the family until it ran into me. Well, I'll promise you, I'm not taking unresolved grief and pushing it off to my family. I'm not taking alcoholism, drug addiction into my family and allowing it to run into another generation. It ran in the family until it ran into me. Period. That's the way you should look at unresolved grief. And if anybody else wants me to talk about anything else in particular, I'd be glad to. I love to talk about grief, for lack of better words, death and dying. I mean, it is a norm in our world. People are going to die. Everybody that's watching this is going to die at some point in time. Everybody that's watching this has had somebody around them die. And the grief process is real. Doesn't matter what you believe. Doesn't matter who you believe in. You're going to grieve. I believe that grief is handled a little bit differently by people who believe a little bit differently. But that's a whole nother segment. I'm not going to go into that today because I've already really run over my time. Reach out. I'd be more than happy to help. You can get my information. You private message me on Facebook, whatever you need to do. But I'd love to hear from you. And in the meantime, keep working on that grief. Love y'all.